Good afternoon.
You should learn how to cut these parts out.
So today I thought I'd do a video on guilt by association.
Hopefully you're against it, in which case we agree, and in which case we wouldn't have a video. So I guess you must be all for it. Let's hear it.
Now this is going to be about the topic of Islam and Muslims. I'm sure you're all familiar with the phrase, not all fill in the blank are, and then fill in the blank again, right?
Yes, I have, but feminists are anything to go by saying things like that is heresy. Like, not all men are violent rapists. Oh my god, he said something offensive! Something alarming!
Not all women are like that. Not all white people are like that. Not all these people or that group or this individual or those individuals are like that, right? Okay, now, most of the time that applies, but sometimes what also applies is, yes, all of fill in the blank are like that. Let me give you an example.
All libertarians believe in the non-aggression principle.
Take tigers and zebras. Two different animals, but they both have stripes. Now, you can accurately say that all tigers have stripes, because that's true. That's been 100% consistent since man has interacted with tigers. All tigers have stripes. But you cannot accurately say that all animals with stripes are tigers, because obviously a zebra is not a tiger, right?
Yes, which applies to Muslims too. Not all Muslims are violent extremists. There are actually some Muslims, now I can't name any names because I don't know about them, but I did hear of them. There are Muslims who are non-violent people. There are Muslims who want to reform their religion from the inside. But, guessing by the title of your video, I'm gonna assume you want to execute the non-violent ones too. In which case, the rest of surviving non-violent ones will automatically assume that they're doomed to death simply because they're Muslims, because these Westerners are executing the violent and non-violent ones alike. And because of that, they're going to turn violent. And thus your self-fulfilling prophecy will come true.
On the one hand, it's accurate to say not all animals with stripes are tigers. On the other hand, it is accurate to say all tigers have stripes. So let's take Muslims and Islam. Every time there's a terrorist attack, I can't help but notice, excuse me, let me back up and rephrase that. Every time there is a jihadist attack, I can't help notice that in the media, the constant theme that is hammered into everyone's head is not all Muslims are like that.
Yes, see, this comes from one thing. The jihadists believe they are Muslims. They're using the same source as the non-violent ones, but they choose to interpret it differently. And now granted, the Quran is a very pro-violence book, but the non-violent Muslims simply ignore the cause for violence because they don't think it to be the correct thing to do. And you can have a no true Scotsman fallacy argument here all you want. This is just what it looks like. The jihadists believe they're the one true Muslims, and the non-violent ones believe they're the one true Muslims. Let them hash it out amongst themselves instead of deciding that both of them should just be murdered.
And in fact, we're told that the vast majority of jihadists, who, even though they come out and say, I'm doing this in the name of Allah, Allahu Akbar, they say, oh, that has nothing to do with Islam. They're not Islamic. They're not, either they're not a Muslim or they're a radical Muslim, right?
And yeah, the mainstream media is lying to you about that. This is absolutely related to at least their interpretation of Islam, if not Islam as a whole. And it is true that there is a disproportionately high amount of violent Muslims rather than the non-violent ones. Or at least the violent ones are the very, very vocal minority. This is where this all, quote-unquote, all Muslims thing comes from. It's a disproportion that is visible to us. And without seeing the silent majority of Muslims who aren't violent, that in our feeble human brains just instills the idea that all Muslims are violent. And I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm not saying that there aren't any violent Muslims. Of course there are. There's, in fact, a significantly disproportionate amount of them, and I believe that the religion is the one driving them. However, I also believe that the religion is just used as an excuse by the already violent ones. Either that, or as a tool to indoctrinate more people into violence in the name of Islam, rather than Islam with violence.
Well, okay, we've established in previous videos that there's no such thing as radical Islam. There's no such thing as a radical Muslim. You're either a Muslim or you're not a Muslim.
Then there also must not be such a thing as a radical Christian, because rules apply universally. If there can be radicals of one religion, there can be radicals of another. So unless you're saying that there is no difference between the Christian who wishes to love thy neighbor and accept them regardless of what kind of a person they are, because they are children of God and should all have the same chance at life, and thus accept things like gay marriage and are rather welcome to Christmas being just an adopted pagan tradition, simply because that's the world they were raised in, and is the kind, compassionate thing to do. There is no difference between those guys and the Bible-thumping people who believe vehemently that the Earth was created 6,000 years ago, that death should be a punishment for divorce, and that gays should be stoned to death.
There's no moderate, there's no radical, it's Islam or nothing. So, in my view, because I know a thing or two about Islam, not everything, not even the tip of the iceberg really, but I'm learning from people that do know a great deal about Islam, that have studied it for decades. Now, according to them, it is accurate and entirely appropriate to lump Muslims together into one group.
Well, duh! They're religious people. They're collectivists. This is the basics of in-group and out-group. Anyone within our in-group, just a holy person, and anyone of the out-group is evil. This is why it's so easy for people like that to conflate the non-violent and the violent Muslims into one group. Because ultimately they're just going to ignore the violent one, ignore the violence of their in-group.
One group that is responsible for every act of jihad. Now, some of you might be wondering why I'm using the term jihad instead of terror.
Because the jihadists believe they're in the right. To them, they're not committing the acts of terror. To them, they are committing the righteous acts of holy war. Again, in-group, out-group. If they were doing the same thing to their own community, of course it would be called terror.
All Muslims have no problem denouncing and condemning terror, because terror is not unique to Islam.
Yes, and the US does the same thing. When they send drone strikes to kill paramedics who go rescue the people injured in their drone strikes, they aren't calling that an act of terror, because that's not what they're committing in their mind. In their mind, they are eliminating potential terrorists, in-group and out-group.
Otherwise, no other group would be known for committing acts of terror. Like the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, okay, they're a terrorist group. They have nothing to do with Islam, but they are a terrorist group engaging in acts of violence and terror. Jihad is unique to Islam. The original jihadist is Muhammad, and there is jihad of the mouth or of speech, jihad of the pen or of writing, and jihad of money or of political contribution, and jihad of the sword. And that's what we see when, that's what we typically call terrorist attacks, okay, the jihad of the sword. It's not just terrorism. Even though Sahih Bukhari does say, Allah's apostle said, I have been made victorious with terror, Islam does use terror, but terrorism is not unique to Islam.
Where is your point? What do you suggest we do about it? Stop stalling and get to it.
Get them to condemn jihad.
About bloody time! He then goes on to rant for a long time about why he thinks our Muslims are evil, and I'm honestly not too interested in that, so I'm gonna cut a big, nice chunk out and get to the point where he actually suggests something we should, perhaps, do about this.
All Muslims do, however, share a responsibility for any act of a Muslim that regresses Islam or goes against Islam.
Then I suppose you will happily kill yourself for the crimes that some straight cis white males committed somewhere in the other part of the world several centuries before your birth. Go on. Do it on camera. I'm waiting.
Let's talk about retaliation and what that might look like and when it would be appropriate.
We already know what it would look like. It led to Iraq, Iran, and the drone strikes recently that Obama has been rampant with and that Trump continues. What we should do is pull the fuck out, because every Muslim we kill they use as a justification to bomb us.
Let's say Boko Haram kidnaps some girls and kills them. Would it be entirely justified and appropriate for someone to retaliate against a random Muslim on the other side of the planet who has no clue who Boko Haram is and doesn't have anything to do with them?
Now, if you're gonna have a double standard, it's gonna have to go both ways.
Not all white people are like that. Absolutely, and here's why.
What am I supposed to say here? No, seriously, what the fuck am I supposed to say here? Because you've literally addressed every single thing I would say to you and you straight up ignore it. You intentionally disregard it. Your double standard applies even to you. Mate, by the logic of yours, and this goes both ways, and that means your way too, the Muslims, you've just given the Muslims you want exterminated, you've given them the excuse, the justification, the reason to kill every single white person. Everyone you know, everyone you care about, everyone you love, your family, your mother, father, all of your relatives and acquaintances, simply because you let them. If I were to be honest, and frankly I kinda want to be, people like you make me want to institute the draft and make it ideologically based, so that we can send people like you off to Afghanistan and then cut you off from any supplies, cut you off from any resources, simply so you can be left to battle the Muslims alone. That way, you can go ahead and fucking die, and you've just given the Muslims the green card to do so, while we individualists over here in the West, in the United States, in wherever the fuck you live, are gonna be left bigot free. So please, go ahead. Go there. Go to the Muslim countries and let them kill you. Because you let them. You allowed them. Your own ideology that dictates that you be held responsible for the crimes that you haven't committed. And even if there were no Muslims present, you should still be hung for the murderer, thief, rapist that you are.